So this panel is called On the Ground Perspectives, How Enforcement Practices Play Out in U.S. Towns, Courts, and Detention Facilities. Basically, these folks are the people on the ground doing, on the front lines, doing the work in immigration jails, in the immigration courts, advocating for immigrants, and in charge of, enforcement and removal operations. So the people we have here today is a very distinguished group of people. Dana Marks, immigration judge and president of the National Association of Immigration Judges. Always worth noting that she works for the Department of Justice and not the Department of Homeland Security, as you all probably know. Raymond Kobus, the sheriff of Luna County in New Mexico, right on the border with Mexico, and Cheryl Little, an immigration lawyer, executive director and co-founder of Americans for Immigrant Justice. So today each person is going to speak for about 7 to 10 minutes, and we'll start with Judge Marks.
Excellent lobbying by my co-speaker, Ms. Little. I had to joke that usually my disclaimer takes about 7 minutes. I am here in my capacity as president of the National Association of Immigration Judges. The association is the recognized collective bargaining unit for all of the nation's approximately 235 sitting immigration judges. That number changes all the time. Management judges, you'll get numbers around 250. That includes judges who are not part of our unit because they are managerial. I also joke that it is frequently a mental competency test as to whether you are oriented to space, time, and political reality. If you think I am representing the opinions of the United States Department of Justice, I suggest that you immediately go back to our hotel where there is a medical conference taking place and seek professional help. You may find that there's a bit of a disagreement here. I am a sitting immigration judge in San Francisco, California, where I have worked for 26 years now. And somebody described this presentation as granular. I think of it more as this is where the rubber, or policy, meets the road. Because I have often said that in the immigration courts, we are conducting death penalty cases in a traffic court setting. I want to give you a little bit of a reality check. One of the things I do in the trial court adjudications that I do is determine whether or not someone's been a victim of persecution. I am being persecuted by being given only 7 minutes to 10 minutes here today. That is persecution per se, and I know it. However, I actually love to talk to the press, and I have taught immigration law for many years as well, both at law school and in practicing law seminars, so I am more than happy to take your phone calls, to spend as much time as we need making sure you understand some of these principles. You don't have to quote me. Sometimes it's more dicey for me to be quoted, but I want to make sure you understand the system and get the story right, because that's what's really important. And it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to lawyers. So don't be shy. There are no bad questions, okay? Immigration courts are the trial-level tribunals that decide whether or not someone is in the United States legally or illegally. And cases can come to us from a variety of ways, from the alphabet soup of the DHS enforcement agencies as well. To give you an idea of why I call it traffic court, David Burnham and TRAC have once again come out and just recently reported what the pending caseload in the immigration courts at the end of fiscal year 2013, which is September 30th, just a couple weeks ago, 344,230. There was a 5.9% rise in our pending caseload in 1 year. The current pending caseload represents an 85% increase in the last 5 years. Now, I won't be your typical government speaker and give you all statistics, okay? But you do need to understand that we have this small number of immigration judges, this unbelievable number of cases, and it affects how we do our work and what is reasonable to expect us to accomplish. And one of the things that I'm going to spend my time on today is explaining to you how the immigration court is not like the courts that many of you reporters are familiar with from having done your normal beats if you're new to immigration. And I think that's very important. The other thought, though, before I go into the nitty-gritty of what my life is like, because you will be so stunned you won't be able to focus on anything else. And you'll also find that I rarely exaggerate. We've been talking a lot about policy, and yet the immigration courts are overwhelmingly overlooked and neglected and forgotten in those policy contexts. In 2009, the union was very instrumental in getting a little piece put in an Appropriations Act bill, which asked that there be a consistent, principled methodology to address the needs of the immigration court. Because over the years, there has been no linkage between these massive increases in Border Patrol and border enforcement funding, which Mr. Rosenblum very generously included in his slides. And I'd like him to do some work on comparing what it has been for the immigration court budgets, because I don't know exactly. But I can tell you that it is woefully out of sync. How do I know that? Because in the 5 years that we've had this 85% increase in in cases, we have had no influx of judges. We've been under a hiring freeze. So we are currently authorized to have 304 sitting immigration judges. We have 235 sitting in the trenches because of other intervening circumstances like hiring freezes. Hoping that there'd be this defensible fiscal linkage examined. Instead, from the National Academy of Sciences, we got a report, and the quotes are in this little document, The State of the Immigration Courts, that you're being given on page 3. And they talk about how DOJ's budget history shows a striking capacity to adapt or make do with available resources. Okay? We joke that the Latin in our motto is "do more faster." Okay? Compared to regular courts, you need to know that immigration courts are an administrative court system. And it is my dying wish and my campaign for the last more than 10 years that the immigration courts become an Article I court, like the tax court. And believe me, that is very arcane and difficult to explain to lawyers, let alone to the general press. But I am going to get you on board with this campaign in the next 4 minutes that I still have left. Why? Because these are death penalty cases. And even if we're not dealing with an asylum seeker, we are dealing often with long-term lawful permanent residents who have been living here from the time they were very young and who commit a crime years ago, which might not have even rendered them deportable at the time, but which can, when Congress changes its mind, make them deportable now. And in immigration court at the trial level, we decide, number one, is that person really here illegally? Are they deportable? Have they violated their status? But that's a very small portion of what we do. The majority of our time is spent on deciding, are you eligible to apply for any kind of immigration benefit, which takes into consideration the equities in your case. Well, realize that we do this. I have a pending caseload of over 2,000 cases. I'm setting my arraignment type calendars out in 2015, and my individual merits dockets on hearings are in June of 2017 right now. I spend 36 hours, the typical immigration judge spends 36 hours a week on the bench. The typical immigration judge has 1/4 of a law clerk. That means one law clerk is helping 4 judges. We give oral decisions from the bench at the end of these hearings. I like to call that extemporaneous performance art. Okay? It was fascinating when circuit court attorneys came to visit us and started talking about the quality of our decisions. And they went, well, when you give an oral decision, you adjourn off the bench and you give it to a law clerk, and they go through the 400 pages of background materials on political conditions in Timbuktu or wherever, right? And you come back and it's just you like the attention, you give that oral decision. It's like, no. I don't even leave to go to the restroom because I will get interrupted and get a phone call, and the black hole that'll be my office will consume me. We have no contempt authority. We have no discovery. Technically speaking, the Department of Justice believes that because our official title for pay purposes is attorney working for the Department of Justice, they say there is no ex parte communication between me and Mr. Macias when he's prosecuting, because we both are government attorneys and we have the same client, the US government. I can be subjected to personal discipline if I do something that my boss does not agree with. He may think it's only procedural with the case. I think it's substantive, okay? For these reasons, we think the structure is fatally flawed and that it cannot be forgotten. Not only give us resources, give us resources, give us resources, we desperately need them, and that becomes obvious. But our association believes that there is this incurable structural flaw which casts doubt on our judicial independence, which causes skepticism, and despite the good intentions of DOJ, undermines our ability to discharge our proven task. So like I said, I could talk to you for days, weeks, months, give you all the background on that, and I hope I get a chance to do that, and I look forward to any questions you have. And I'm on time, because I know how to run a courtroom.
All right, exactly on time, thank you. And it's amazing to hear, judges trying to bolt the Department of Justice is quite a story. It's really something. Sheriff, please, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I'm Raymond Kobus. I was elected as sheriff in Luna County in 2006. One of the things that I have to do is I have to describe my location. It's a county. It's on the border, 3,000 square miles. I have 36 deputies and a population of about 30,000. We have. I grew up along the border, and one of the things that we face, of course, is a dearth of resources, and that's mainly because we're a wide open area in New Mexico. As I said, we share 54 miles of border with Mexico. To my immediate west is the county of Hidalgo, and they have about 1,000 square miles more than I do, 4,100 square miles. They have a population of 5,000, and they have 8 deputies. That's 8. And so frequently they call on me for assistance. So we ended up having a coalition of sheriffs in New Mexico, 5 sheriffs. So we're cross-commissioned in 5 counties. That means I send my deputies over there to Hidalgo County on a regular basis at the request of their sheriff. In 2005, I was invited along with a number of my staff to a place called Lebaron in northwestern Chihuahua. It's a town, it's a Mormon community, but we were asked to prevent some drug, tobacco, alcohol, and gang classes down there. Apparently they'd come up to Deming and had seen our performance there and thought it was great, applicable to their system. The thing about that was that we were going to do this and have this stuff done annually. I get back to New Mexico. We were treated like kings, incidentally. Our money was no good down there, but we were treated like kings. Even when we came to the military checkpoint, they halted all traffic and let us go by. We were in civilian clothing, but the word got out that we were sheriffs and we were escorted through. We were treated just absolutely grand. So we came back in 2005. Within a few months, that's when the entire border erupted in some grisly violence on the Mexican side. Some of the people that we had met on the law enforcement end in Lebanon, incidentally, that's also one of the places where Mitt Romney's family originated, was there in northwestern Chihuahua. But one of the things that was so bad was that some of the people that we met in their police department ended up being killed. And so violence erupted all along the border, and one of the things that we did is that we sat there and had to make plans. And sure enough, immediately the sister city of Columbus, anyway, Columbus is right on the border. That's only 2 incorporated towns in Luna County, and that's Deming, the county seat, and Columbus, which is about 1,500 population, but it sits right there on the border. That's the site where Pancho Villa came over in March of 1916, came over and burned part of the town, killed a number of 18 or so Americans, then retreated back to Mexico, giving rise to the punitive expedition with General Pershing, letting his troops go into Mexico, which provided some excellent training and preparation for World War I. The thing about that is that obviously Pancho Villa was never caught. And he was assassinated in 1923, some years later after he made peace with the government in Mexico. The point that I'm making there is that really all along the border there, it's never really been safe. If you want to try to put a definition of safety on the border, it is a border. Mexico has a history of violence beginning with the revolution and even before then. And they lost over 1 million people in their revolution in 1910. And a lot of families came over to the United States, particularly into Columbus. We have, if you care to research it, Lowell Thomas had some pictures of Mexican tequileros bringing pack trains of tequila and sotol up to the border, and then on the U.S. side, trucks were loaded, and then during the Prohibition era in the 20s. So there's always been a culture of exchanges along there, legal or illegal. So the point about this violence is that all of a sudden we had to prepare for what was inevitable. And sure enough, within a few weeks, cars were arriving at our port of entry with dead and dying people in there. We have some rather graphic pictures of what can happen to a body that's been hit by AK-47 fire from a distance of 3 to 4 feet. People are coming across the border, so the cars were there. They're trying to escape the assassination attempts. And things got, I guess they developed and morphed into more sophisticated types of violence where they assassinated them on streets that paralleled the border so they couldn't get to the port of entry. Later on, they developed into abductions, and later on the bodies were found after the assassins told the families where to find them, south of the border. But that prompted us to have some reaction to it. And one of the reactions to it was to forge some very strong partnerships with our state and our federal agencies, ICE, Border Patrol. And so we ended up having to work together with them because we realized that one agency alone was just simply not sufficient to combat this possibility of border violence coming over to our side. We have even had to make plans, like if we had people arrive at the border that were still alive, we'd transport them by air to Thomas and General Hospital in El Paso, which is the nearest trauma center, which is about 110 miles away. If inclement weather prevented that, then we had to transport them to a local hospital, which meant our SWAT team had to lock it down, and part of the SWAT team had to escort the ambulance and then make sure it got there, and then they'd lock down the airport and got these victims out of our jurisdiction as soon as possible. Those were our plans, and they're still in effect today. Now, again, the disruption to the trade, to the families, to the relationships between our two countries, right there in that particular area, and that's where I'm the expert and not beyond my borders anyway, but it was catastrophic. So now all these things had come into effect, and changes had to be made. Prior to that, in 2005, a senior Border Patrol officer told me that to stay away from the border was his, and so I told him, I said, my wife works at the tax assessor's office. She has maps, and it seems like our county goes all the way to the border. That's my jurisdiction. I had to tell him that, of course, that the Border Patrol was had to complement what we did. They did not investigate crime, such as rapes or murders or homicides or robberies or anything like that. That's where we come in. We had a situation where there was an ejido, that's a land grant given to some farmers there. That became a base of operations for people being smuggled across the border. And typically 30, 40 people would be smuggled across the border every day. And they'd be taken over by guides, or they're called coyotes, and they're taken across to an area. And in this particular case, they're taken to an area where, on the U.S. side, where Mexican bandits are waiting for them. They'd strip down the people at gunpoint and take all their money from them. And then they had no choice except to go north, wave down the nearest state police, sheriffs, or Border Patrol officer, and get some assistance to return back to Mexico. The Border Patrol did not investigate any of that because those are criminal acts performed in the United States, which made it the responsibility of the sheriff. We had to end up making some backstreet contacts with the Mexican Army, and they agreed to move in and clear that area. And that's the only way that we're able to effect a solution to it. So from that point on, we had to sit there and rethink our entire strategy. On the part of the Border Patrol, they came around to our way of thinking, and all of a sudden they came up with some programs. One of the most effective programs for us is called Operation Stone Garden. What that does, it gives the local authorities money for overtime and also pays for some of the operational costs. We even buy police cars with it. And so what happens is that through that and through relationships with some of the other agencies, the other sheriffs, we were able to organize an efficient and very close relationship with some of our federal agencies. To that end, where we ended up having something like 300 to 400 incarcerations or apprehensions per day. That's per day. In our area, we're down to about 8 or 9, 8 or 10. So I think they've been very effective in that area. So I would have to compliment the Border Patrol, the federal agencies, for doing a very, very good job in our area. True, I think what we've done is we pushed our problems over to some of the other areas, southwest New Mexico and southeastern Arizona in particular. So, but anyway, those are the kind of things that we're contending with, and we're going to continue using our relationships to monitor the border security and all the traffic along the border. I'll be able to answer any questions if you want.
Great. Thank you, Sheriff.
Am I under?
And you're on time. It's amazing. We'll keep doing this. So Cheryl Little will be our next speaker, and I'll get out of your way. Thank you.
I'm going to stand up to stay awake. Well, I'm an advocate. So I might sort of take issue with a few things, but I'll start by saying I know there are very good people who work with the Border Patrol, with immigration, lots of good immigration judges, so that needs to be kept in mind. A little background. The reason we opened our doors at Americans for Immigrant Justice is I, along with 2 Catholic nuns who were attorneys, we were working with the Legal Services Group, and we believed a law was going to pass which was going to prevent us and other attorneys like us at LSC agencies from assisting immigrants unless they were already legal. And so we opened our doors, the law passed, we inherited 3,000 cases, year 1. And then 2 laws passed, 2 laws that contained many anti-immigrant provisions. This was after the World Trade Center bombing, the Oklahoma City bombing, and they contained provisions like expedited removal, mandatory detention. Judge Marks mentioned aggravated felony, expanded the definition of aggravated felony to include just about everything, including crimes that weren't aggravated or felonies at the time, crimes that were only misdemeanors and not even grounds for removal. And it was retroactive. So people who'd lived here for decades and had a lot of these people actually pled guilty because they were getting credit for time served. They just wanted to get out of jail. And lo and behold, these are lawful permanent residents who were suddenly facing permanent deportation. We thought things couldn't get much worse, and then there was the tragedy of 9/11. And things absolutely got much worse. And I don't think that it's entirely unreasonable to suggest that after 9/11, in many ways, we saw the criminalization of immigrants who've lived here for years, worked hard, paid taxes, have U.S. citizen children, and broken no criminal laws. I remember operations like Operation Endgame, a nice operation which did a very effective job of rounding up immigrants in immigrant neighborhoods. We certainly saw this in Florida and throughout the country, raiding certain factories where lots of immigrants worked. And in the absence of comprehensive immigration reform in places like Avon Park, Florida, and I forget the other little town in Florida, but they worked very hard to pass anti-immigrant ordinances that were just draconian. We were able to, with others, prevent it at the last hour. But for example, in Avon Park, Florida, they had a sign, I don't know if it's still there, I have a picture, "Welcome to Avon Park, have passports and green cards ready." In fact, I'll just tell you a little caveat. In Deerfield Beach, Florida, I got a call from a reporter saying, "Listen, Cheryl, is this legal?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, look, the manager, the president of this condo association in Deerfield Beach posted something in the bulletin board," and she said to all the residents there, 70% of whom were from Brazil, "I've asked immigration to come and check all your papers. And if you don't allow them to, I'm going to allow them forced entry into your units." I actually saw the note that was posted in the bulletin board. And needless to say, people who lived there, even if they were legal, were looking for a new home. The enforcement program that most troubles us right now, or one of the most, is secure communities, and I know Mark talked about that. It's at the time of booking, not conviction, booking, that your fingerprints are sent to the FBI and consequently to immigration. And immigration then requests the county, the jail officials to put a hold, a detainer, so that you won't get released as quickly as you normally would. In other words, no, hold them because we want to determine whether or not we're going to put them in ICE custody and deport them. DHS's plan was to implement in each of the 3,100 state and local jails secure communities by 2013. All 67 counties in Florida signed off pretty early on. The goal was to target the most dangerous and violent offenders. The reality is, and I've talked to many people like this, driving their car, driver's license expired more than 6 months, pulled over, asked for the driver's license, don't have it, ticket to go to jail. Oh, and guess what? And the passengers in the car, we're going to ask them for their driver's licenses too, okay? And so the Broward Transitional Center, which is outside of Miami, Florida, in Broward County, has 700 beds. These are people who have either no criminal history or something like a minor traffic violation. These are the people we see every day when we go out there. I forgot to mention that the enforcement program where ICE is working more closely with local law enforcement, this is something that started quite some time ago. And in fact, Florida was started the first 287G, that's the Memorandum of Understanding with ICE to act as ICE agents. We proudly had that first program. Many law enforcement officials were very much against it because they said, we've worked hard to build trust with the immigrant community. We value that trust. It's important for us. We want them to report crimes if they're victims of crimes or witnesses to crimes. And this is eroding that trust that we've worked so hard to build. In terms of the ESCOM program, DHS's own data, in fiscal year 2011, 29% of the folks they picked up were low priority and 26% had committed no crime at all. The University of California, Berkeley School of Law, in October 2011, issued a report. They concluded 3,600 United States citizens were erroneously arrested in the first 6 months of ESCOM, and that Hispanics, not surprisingly, were disproportionately targeted. In September of 2011, DHS's Advisory Council raised serious concerns about this program, and in fact, half of the 14 members of the council concluded that it was so flawed that it needed to be suspended. The irony when I think of programs like this is so many of the people that are being targeted today are people who would be eligible for relief if a comprehensive immigration reform bill were to pass. Hello. On the one hand, we're saying we think we need this, and the other hand, we're saying, but we're going to get you before you're eligible if it does happen to pass. We filed Freedom of Information Act request to get 1 year's worth of documentation on the SCOM program in Miami-Dade County, Florida. What did we find? We worked with the Florida International University, an academic institution, to help us analyze the data. I think there were 1,800 cases that we looked at. The vast majority of these cases were low priority, and yet 87%, over 60%, I believe, 87% of these folks were ordered deported. And recently, we had a news conference. A local law firm did an analysis of the cost of this program, and they concluded that it cost roughly Miami-Dade County taxpayers $12.5 million every year to support this program. We had a glimmer of hope in June of 2011 when ICE Director John Morton issued a directive basically saying, let's exercise our prosecutorial discretion, so that we are targeting the bad guys and not the folks who've lived here for years, et cetera, et cetera. They wanted to keep the low priority cases out of the deportation pipeline to begin with. They were going to review 300,000 pending cases. Reality, this is according to IPC. As of May 29th, 2012, only 46 out of 156,180 detained cases, less than 1%, were found eligible for administrative closure. At AI Justice, when we went into the BTC, for example, we'd see survivors of trafficking, survivors of domestic violence, dreamers, asylum seekers, people who were clearly had compelling cases for relief. And these were people who were being targeted for deportation. Now, the irony is, I know I just have a few minutes left, when the sequester came about, the silver lining in that dark cloud was that suddenly we started getting calls from clients who'd been detained for ages saying, I was just released, because they were quietly being released just before the sequester became official. And according to an Associated Press article in I think, March of 2013, ICE had released 2,000 such immigrants, and we're planning to release 3,000 more. I don't know if they did because there was a lot of criticism about it. But what does that tell us? A, these are people who shouldn't be targeted in the first place, and B, we're wasting taxpayer money. There's no question about it. The last thing I'll say, because I know I'm running out of time, the human costs. When I talk to women, for example, at BTC, what's their greatest fear? Losing custody of their children. The national, in November 2011, the Applied Research Center, in concert with colorlines.com, issued a report. And what they said was that at the time of their report, there were at least 5,100 children in foster care because the parent or parents had been detained and or deported. And that they anticipated that over the next 5 years, there would be an additional 15,000. I don't have time to tell you about Blanca's case. I have a 5-page statement from her, but let me tell you, for 2 whole months, she was first in BTC, then they transferred her to a jail in Texas. She had 2 young sons who were with her at the time of her arrest in a car, just stopped, asked for a driver's license, didn't have it. Dad goes to Chrome, mom goes to BTC. 2 kids, rather than going with her lawful permanent resident sister, are placed in foster care, but she doesn't know it, dad doesn't know it. Kids think the parents have abandoned them for 2 months. For 2 months, she had absolutely no information about them. When she finally got back to BTC, we found out and we had to tell her, there's a hearing scheduled to determine whether or not you're going to lose custody of your children. Okay? And I could go on and on, but I know I don't have time, because what happened to this woman was horrific, and it's not an isolated story. So I don't have time to talk about the CBP errors, but if you ask me a question, I will.
Okay, so I promised Julian next. We'll get to everybody, hopefully.
With respect to the asylum process, it's something Your Honor and I spoke about earlier, does, with the Dream 9 and Dream 30, does that help or hurt other asylum claims? And I'm asking because the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee has launched, or asked DHS to investigate the rise in asylum claims from Mexico, saying that they're not legitimate, they're gaming the system. So I just kind of want to know what, if the Dreamers are actually helping or hurting, say, journalists from Mexico who are threatened, who are actually beaten, who, folks that have their legs chopped off that are seeking asylum.
There's, obviously, I don't know any concrete answer to that, but there are, we were discussing earlier some of the work that's been done about judge watching and the statistics of grants and the statistics of denials, and are there patterns and how statistically valid those patterns are. I was talking about all the different variables that go into that, and in that consideration is the fact that, of course, an able defense attorney is going to do whatever they possibly can to try to get their client a benefit. That includes trying to advance and change the immigration laws to go where no immigration lawyer has ever gone before. And that often means trying to expand political asylum now, because the changes in the law have made that the only option. And I think it's a very interesting issue personally, and this is just my personal opinion, not representing anybody else, that the time may have come again for us to look at more international models to try to decide how to interpret our immigration law, which is based on international norms. Because there is this evolution going on as to the qualifying nexus. To qualify for asylum, not only do you have to have past persecution or a well-founded fear of future persecution, and it has to be by the government or a group the government cannot control, so there's a bunch of little pieces, but it also has to be on account of 5 specific nexus bases. And one of those is the catch-all is particular social group, and that's where lawyers are trying to put in those cases. I haven't seen the Dream 30's applications, but one might speculate that that would be where their cases would go. And those are very dicey and difficult questions that I think divide the immigration lawyers community as well, right? Isn't that, I'm sure Cheryl would know that that's a philosophical question that I'm sure comes up, that, what do you do? What is your responsibility as a lawyer to your individual client, as opposed to development of the law in general, where taking a position that might be considered too extreme or too forceful may end up hurting? I don't know if you have an insight on that, or no easy answers, but thank you for raising it.
Okay, someone from over there in the end?
Frank Ordonez from McClatchy. Judge, I was curious, heard Attorney Little talk about the small amount of cases reviewed after prosecutorial discretion, the Morton memo. I was wondering, how often when you're seeing cases come to you, are you seeing a case that you feel could have been seen as, I guess, dismissed because of prosecutorial discretion, that could have made your work a little easier, that could have reduced some of that backlog? Is that a common occurrence?
It is hard to quantify. It varies dramatically across the country. I have frequently been heard to say that in San Francisco, stipulation is a 4-letter word. Fortunately, they're beginning to change that, and we're seeing more prosecutorial discretion. Often it comes very late in the process, which in a way is frustrating to me because it doesn't help me recoup that time on my docket. A case goes away, which, believe me, I can use the time, but it doesn't allow me to put another case in the slot because of that. And I think prosecutorial discretion, it's difficult. Immigration law is a very strange creature where you can't really plea bargain. Sometimes maybe you could come to some kind of intermediate solution which might be helpful to people, but very often it's either an outright grant or a denial, so it's hard to find a middle ground. One of the reasons why immigration judges are arguing for independence is we believe that it might bring with it more traditional legal tools that allow us to do mediation type solutions and to try to moderate those kinds of situations more than we currently can.
But it sounds like the implementation of prosecutor discretion hasn't had much of an impact on your workload or on your workload? Or?
Once again, TRAC has incredible statistics following how we could not function in these conferences without TRAC and their work. So thank you again, and I always give them a shout out every time I speak.
Me too.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be familiar with their website, which is why there's a training tomorrow morning about it. It's hard to know what the real numbers are, but the reality is in the trenches that new receipts of charging documents and cases continues to outpace completions, even including prosecutorial discretion completions. We are drowning. We are beyond drowning. I am drowning with cement, on my feet, pulling me down farther and farther and farther. I have run out of adjectives. You're all writers. If you can help me. Overwhelmed, overburdened, and crisis. I need to exponentially, augment those by about tenfold. And again, I said, it may sound like I am prone to hyperbole. I am speaking the truth. That is how just overwhelmed and besieged we are. And so prosecutorial discretion was terrific. But has it solved our problems? Nowhere near.
Mark, sure, go ahead.
Add a tag on that, which is that, that's in the context of such a huge increase in resources and these new programs. So we don't really know.
Not to us, though.
Right. That ICE and CBP are bringing so many more people into the system. Mm-hmm. And presumably they're bringing fewer more people in than they would in the absence of these discretion memos. And there's the two different discretion programs. There's the Morton memos allow the ICE field offices, the ICE station heads to not issue a detainer or to not proceed, so it never gets that far. And then there's also the DOJ, DHS review of people who are already in the middle of proceedings. So when you talk about discretion, there's two different programs that we're talking about.
Let us say that we've resolved the whole problem of the undocumented immigrants here today. We start with a whole, fresh, clean slate. What are, or what should be our principles, our values, our legal structure on deportation? Should we, as a nation, just automatically deport somebody who comes in illegally? Should it be
That's what
easy
you guys
thing
have
do?
to figure out.
No.
Well, no,
I
but
really would
not
love
to talk-
for
let me-
the four of you to answer that because it really does get to the question. I mean, it is the bigger context is we can go back and forth about the weeds of the current situation, which clearly is very, very difficult. But that's not our long-term policy solution.
Right. There are ethical constraints on me as a judge that I cannot give you an opinion on substantive immigration law. I can only talk about procedure. But I do think it's important to underscore, and I think what our speaker last night, Demetrius, said was fabulous. We need to make sure that whatever solution is chosen, whatever policy we agree on, that we then have mechanisms to routinely follow up and make sure they're being enforced. Because what I can comment now, one of the tremendous dysfunctions in our current system that has not been addressed by the comprehensive, quote unquote, immigration reform bill, which I don't believe is really comprehensive. A lot of experts agree with me that it is still piecemeal and it may not even be reform. But it doesn't achieve the stated desired result. The expansion of the definition of aggravated felon, as an example, is a lawyer's paradise. And I was in private practice for 10 years. I'm saying that with complete respect and solidarity. I'm not saying that it's wrong. That's what private practitioners defending immigrants need to do. But by the same token, if what we want to do is prioritize our resources so that we're not just throwing money at a problem and having it have no effect, then we need to be smart about it and don't give them those loopholes, right? Make a law which is not so detailed that any lawyer worth their salt starts salivating because there's so many ways it can be challenged. That's the way we're trained to think. It would be unethical for any lawyer to do anything but that. And that's, I think, unfortunately, where the law hits the public policy, and then there's in this interface is the public perception and how the sound bites prevail instead of people really sitting down and talking like this morning about there's no one easy answer. That's, I think, personally where I think the problem is, and that's as much as I can say. So I'll defer to see if anybody else can say more.
Yeah, go ahead. Over there. You? Yes.
I wanted to ask Judge Marks a little bit more about the asylum issue. Along the border, there's been a pretty significant increase in the number of people asking for asylum. In Arizona, we've seen a big influx of people from India being smuggled through Central America and then through Mexico and arriving at the border. I think over half the people in detention now in Arizona are from India. I'm wondering what your take is on this kind of influx of asylum seekers and how legitimate you think those cases are.
Well, I can't comment on anything that might eventually be a case in front of me, and there are a lot of changes of venue from the border area. But I will say there are some people who believe, and I've heard this discussed, that the system is being gamed to a certain extent because it is so dangerous to cross the border illegally. People who want to come here of all nationalities are aware of the fact that if they present themselves at a port of entry and present a plausible, rational basis for why they are afraid they would be persecuted at home, that they will get a hearing before an officer. Some will be put in detention, but many others will be allowed to post bond and be released because of the constraints there are with the economics. So I have heard some people say, and I have no way of knowing whether this is accurate or not accurate, but that it's more cost effective to, and that smugglers and travel agents, who are often quite closely related to smugglers, are aware of that as a strategy, and that that might be part of the phenomenon that you're referring to. There's also, however, a corollary phenomenon that I hear going on, reports from the border, that there are an increasing number of unaccompanied minors who are traveling. And I don't doubt the motives there, and I think that's at crisis proportions as well. And maybe Mr. Macias can talk about both of those phenomenons from ICE's point of view. I think it's...
Can I just, in terms of the unaccompanied minors, because we have a program at AI Justice, and we represent virtually every unaccompanied minor who's in proceedings facing removal. And
in Miami area.
Well, yeah. I mean, there are two major shelters, and we go to both of them every week. And we and advocates like us across the country have seen pretty much the tripling of this population in the past few years. And we believe that, at least to a large extent, it's because of the increased gang violence in certain Central American countries. I mean, we speak to these children, and we know when we're being suckered, so to speak, and we assess credibility very carefully because we have very limited resources, and we can't waste our resources helping people who we don't think have compelling cases for relief. But it seems very apparent to us that many of these kids have been threatened by these horrific gangs in some of these countries, and that their lives truly are at stake. I mean, they're forced to, they're basically told, join these gangs or else. Sometimes, their families are targeted because there's a lot of extortion involved, and on and on and on, and I don't have time to go into that. But I do think that a lot of those claims are legitimate, and we are very concerned about the increasing outflow.
Yes.
Marilyn G. Wax with NPR. My question, Your Honor, is for you. I love an adjective challenge. I love when you listed all those words that you felt overwhelmed and all of that. And this afternoon, the House leadership said that they definitely would not vote on any form of immigration reform this year. So it's definitely been kicked over into an election year now.
Surprise.
I'm shocked.
So, Well, that's what I'm looking for, your adjectives on that. Give us a starter list and we'll fill in the
Couldn't have been a
rest.
judge for 26 years without keeping those adjectives to oneself.
I wonder, like, do you sit there thinking about, like, how can they be not acting in Washington, or is the problem so bureaucratic that it doesn't matter that much what Congress actually does? Or does it matter a great deal to you whether or not Congress takes up immigration reform? Would it affect your
Well,
court greatly?
Personally, I am very concerned that the resource issues will not be addressed in a timely fashion, and those need to be addressed whatever our system is. After 26 years of working for the federal government, I still admit that I am a complete naive babe in the woods as to how these things actually happen, because I certainly think that the position of the association is aligned with the position of the high officials at the Executive Office for Immigration Review, and that they are doing everything they believe they can do. That said, one of the reasons we've advocated Article 1 is, regardless of good intentions, it's clear that the Department of Justice has failed us, because the resources are a no-brainer. And in a way, it is shooting ourselves in the foot to have all this enforcement and have this, talk about an hourglass, talk about the point of constriction. You know, not every case will have to come before the immigration court, because there are some border turnarounds or expedited removals that go into the 409,000 cases. There are some fugitive operations where older orders are being picked up and people don't have any right to a hearing before a judge. But again, a rational linkage between how many cases are touched by ICE enforcement folks and how many end up in court should not be that difficult to figure out. But it stumped the National Academy of Sciences. And in 2009, when they came up and said, gee, this stumps us, nobody does anything else. I am concerned. I do feel like we are the Titanic almost, cruising for that iceberg, because we are the state of the art in so many ways. We adjudicate a tremendous number of cases with a very low reversal rate. So that one would assume is a very low error rate. And yet we're so overwhelmed that we're not going to be able to continue to fulfill our mission.
What you're describing is more, you would be more concerned with budgetary issues and resource allocation with the budget than with the policy itself. I mean, so
well,
which
I
is more
have
important?
to officially. That's what I said. As a judge, it's unethical for a judge to take a position on a substantive area of law that would affect them. Section 3501 of the Senate bill, I believe 3506 or 7, does have resources for the immigration court. That plea, we did go lobby, and we got included in the Senate and in the House bill, H.R. 15, 75 new immigration judges every year for the next 3 years, 75 new judicial law clerks. Many of my colleagues would argue that they'd rather have a law clerk in their office added than another judge. But in terms of the policy, I don't mean to be coy with you all, but it is a question of ethics. If I say A should be the law and then B is legislative, somebody who comes in front of me with case A or with case B is going to say, she's already decided you shouldn't have B, you should have A, and I could be recused. So that's the dilemma that we're in.
Okay, and we're nearing the end, but Kirk, you had a question?
Yeah, Kirk Semple from the New York Times. This is a question for Judge Marks, but also for Cheryl. Sorry for piling on, but we haven't talked about legal representation. You did mention.
Well, thank you. That's the other. There's many things on here, and that's a good one.
Yeah. How concerned are the two of you about the quality of legal representation for detainees facing deportation? I'm mad you have different views from opposite sides of the bench, but you may well see the exact same thing.
We probably agree on this.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're familiar with.
Let me just give some of your colleagues a statistical background on that.
Sure.
That here these are death penalty cases, and yet only 60% of the people overall in the system are represented by counsel at no expense to the government. They have to pay for themselves. These are civil proceedings. They do not have the right to appointed counsel. when you go to the detained settings, the number rises to 85% of the people are unrepresented. 85% are unrepresented. It is a tremendous assistance to the courts to have attorney representation, and we have gone on record and written policy statements encouraging any solution to that problem, more pro bono funded attorneys for certain people, and there are initiatives underway to fund pro bono representation, free representation for people who have mental incapacity issues and for minor children. Some of those things are in the works. So the association strongly encourages any mechanism that can be used because it helps our process. Because people are held to the same standard whether they have a lawyer or not. That's the pitch I have to give them in court, is say to them, I'm sorry, the law is the same. I'll do everything I can to do, find out about your case, but you have to meet that same standard, which includes getting your documents translated, getting background conditions on your home country, getting expert witnesses if need be to educate someone about the home country. Those are very difficult things for a private individual to do.
I would just add, I noticed Adrian at one point said, and a pro bono attorney called me and I looked into it, and guess what? That is the issue. We're the only nonprofit in Florida, for example, that provides free legal help to immigrants at the Broward Transitional Center. We travel to the different facilities that house ICE detainees throughout Florida. Very few pro bono groups are able to do that. Frankly, our resources are stretched. My concern is, when you've got 85% of the folks in detention without legal representation. Unfortunately, and it saddens me to say this, but there are some lawyers who take advantage of that. They know, I can charge you, I can take your money, I'm not going to do a good job of representing you because I'm probably not even going to meet with you until a couple hours before the hearing, and you'll be deported, and that's the end of the story. And that is a huge problem. And when, unaccompanied minors have no right to legal representation, people with serious mental health issues, this is huge, and especially when there's so much at risk. I mean, these decisions, as Judge Marks has said, can be literally life and death decisions. And oftentimes we learn about a case at the last minute and we're scrambling trying to help because we realize that for example, if we don't help this child, right now we're facing a serious dilemma. We get some Justice Department money to give Know Your Rights presentations to these unaccompanied children and then to screen the cases, but we don't get any money to represent them on an individual case if we think they have a right to fight removal. And we're no longer able to represent every kid we think has that compelling case. And that means that child is going to go back to a country where their life may very well be at risk.
I'd like to throw just in quickly one more resource issue that I had wanted to touch on, which is the increased use of video teleconferencing, the fact that because of the budget constraints, we're having more telephonic foreign language interpreters. Only 16% of our proceedings are in English. The rest are for foreign language interpreters. And if there is not a foreign language interpreter local, they will be teleconferenced in, and sometimes hearings are done by video teleconferencing. When you have someone unrepresented and they see this talking head of a judge and a telephonic voice as their interpreter, there are some major problems.
Even when they're represented.
It's quite a scene. And that's a problem too, because on one hand, yes, you want to balance efficiency. And I can see doing video teleconferencing as an opportunity to ease transportation costs, to try to keep people detained less because we can hold a hearing sooner. I mean, there's some benefits to it, but I think it's another emerging area where we have to be very careful.
Laura? This is hard. Laura Meckler from the Wall Street Journal. I have a question for you. If assuming people are not in detention, what is the terrible effect of having such a backlog? I understand why it puts more pressure on the judges to try to clear it, But from the point of view of public policy, what bad thing is happening just because people are waiting?
That's an excellent question. A lot of people are very cynical and say people want to stay here, so what difference does it make if their hearing is pushed off? There are many forms of relief where people need a qualifying relative. That relative can die. That relative perhaps has to be a minor child. That relative can age out, is what a lawyer would say. They turn become an adult. If someone at 18, if someone is a refugee, the emotional compounding of being in limbo status, the traumatic stress that exacerbates, can be extremely serious. Even if somebody doesn't particularly seem to have a super compelling need to have their case adjudicated soon, what happens if their elderly parent in the home country becomes ill? Most of the time, if you are in immigration court proceedings, you cannot travel. You have to ask Mother May I permission from DHS, and my perception is that that's not an easy thing to obtain. So those are some of the examples. I also think it's problematic. We have heard complaints from pro bono attorneys, volunteer attorneys who are willing to take cases, that in the big firms, they have associates for a year or two. They can't believe it when they come into court and we go, we'll hear from you 4 years from now. And San Francisco is not the worst. There's Phoenix, I think, somewhere in Arizona, Tucson maybe, is out, I think, to 2018. So it makes it more difficult to get those lawyers to appear, to prepare those cases. Witnesses' memory fades, including the respondent themselves. I mean, there is a slew of reasons why it just is far from ideal and is highly detrimental.
Sandra, we haven't heard from you.
I'm Sandra Rodriguez, the Manuel Fellow. I wonder if the violence in Mexico, the recent violence, has been a factor in this problem of immigration, either because some people has been immigrating illegally, escaping from the violence, or some immigrants in some cases have been argued as a hardship, the violence in Mexico. I don't know if you have noticed this element as a part of the problem.
Well, there appears to be anecdotal support for that. I don't think anyone has done anything where statistically we could prove it, but you're absolutely right. That seems to be the consensus of a lot of people involved in the field, that political conditions abroad have a direct impact on what the immigrant flow, and that includes, in particular, Mexico, because they are so closely situated to us that the first place you would think to go is the United States. Something happens in the Far East, may not be the first place they can get to is the United States.
We haven't heard from you.
Paul Wiseman with the Associated Press. I was just wondering why, when we've seen a decrease in illegal immigration because of the weak economy, why is the system still under so much strain? Shouldn't there have been some relief if the activity's been decreasing, or is it a backlog issue, or why hasn't there been any relief?
It's been too little, too late all the way along. It was 2006 when Attorney General Gonzalez conducted a study of the Immigration Court and had 22 recommendations. And Track, again, did a fabulous report on, a couple of years later, how far they had gotten on doing that. I apologize that it's hard for me to know exactly how many sitting immigration judges there are at any given time and to do those percentages, because the department does not really release that information in any organized fashion. It's catch as catch can. But at one point, the calculation from Track was that there's at least a 5% attrition rate, just normal retirements. It is a job that most people, unlike me, who was very young when I got the job 25 years ago, but most people are farther along in their career. And so they are closer to retirement age. So the Corps probably has a higher than average rate of retirement in that as well. But from the time that Alberto Gonzalez said that we should have 40 more immigration judges in 2006, and I'm struggling. I think at that point the Corps was at 240. We barely got to 280 before then. We've come back. I think it took us like 4 years to get to that high point, and we're back down to 250 because of attrition. So that, from my point of view, that's all I can say, is that we have not been given adequate resources at an appropriate time, and the snowball effect occurs. So work on those adjectives.
So let's just bundle our last two questions, Sandra and Anne.
Judge Marks and also Cheryl, given the backlog, what type of ramification do the backlogs have on the people in detention? In other words, what type of percentage of people are being paroled versus maybe languishing in there for, like I've seen in Florida, a couple months at a time, and it might be on a status violation, and yet because of the way the contracts now go with some of these detention facilities, they're privately run, sometimes they're county jails that hold the contract. People on a status violation are often sometimes, locked up with people in there wanted on violent crimes. So what type of oversight exists right now for the conditions in these detention facilities, and specifically for children with this explosion and uncovering minors that you mentioned?
The structural difference, because I am just an administrative judge, I have no control over the conditions of detention.
Nor do I, sadly.
The highest priority for the Department of Justice with regard to immigration court completions, however, is detained cases. And there is an aspirational goal that detained cases will be completed within a 60-day period. But it is a resource issue, and how close we get to accomplishing that is not because we don't want to be doing it. It's because you need to have enough judges assigned, enough courtrooms available to schedule those dockets and have those hearings held.
One of the things I will add, recently, and I think this is a nationwide problem, if someone expresses a need for a credible fear or reasonable fear interview, a claim to asylum, the delays have really been very troubling. At BTC, for example, we've had folks who requested these interviews waiting 2 months for the interview, then maybe waiting another couple of months for the decision. And word is going around, look, don't ask for these interviews because you could get out quicker if you don't. If, for example, you're Haitian right now and you have no criminal history.
That's in a detained setting?
Mm-hmm.
That's in detention.
Yeah, this is in detention. I've written a number of letters to our field office director about it, and have called the asylum office. I think you're a really good guy. I'm very impressed.
We're all moving to El Paso, right?
I'm just shocked because, as I said earlier, the asylum officers see our people in under 7 days. They're before the judge within about 10 days. So it's hearing
the asylum office backlog, and it could be that they just don't have the resources to do the job. But we've been trying to get an interview with the asylum office for a while now. Look, we understand that people like you all are overwhelmed. The asylum office can be overwhelmed. However, again, it's U.S. taxpayers with respect to the Haitians, because the Haitians who are in detention of late have no criminal history, and our policy is not to deport them. So we've asked immigration, we'll release them and let them have the credible fear once they're released. But I haven't gotten a response to that. Can I just add one thing? That when I was talking about shattered families torn apart, I didn't mention that in 2010 there was a groundbreaking decision by the OAS, Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And they found that the current detention policy is a violation of human rights because it's leading to the destruction of families, and it's not considering as it should the best interest of children. Having said that, immigration lately is moved in the direction of trying to do a better job of helping, for example, parents who are detained communicate with their children and that kind of thing. And I think there was a bill introduced recently on the Hill that would do something similar. I just wanted to make sure that,
If I may,
yeah.
about the detention, I ran a detention facility, and we had a contract with U.S. Marshals to hold a number of federal prisoners. And the stipulations were quite concrete. They were not mixed with the local population. So however they came from, whether it's from ICE or from the U.S. Marshals Office as immigration holds, they were kept separately in a different part of the facility. And those, by the terms of our contract, that had to be observed very strictly. And so there was no mixing of anybody. Now, if they were mixed over there at the Marshal's office or in the ICE detention centers, we had no control over that. But when they came to our facility, they were not mixed with the local population.